Welcome to the beautiful island nation of Singapore and this year's 2022 Leadership Summit 360. We have some of the most powerful and best-known CEOs and corporate leaders in the world attending this year's summit, and we expect a worldwide audience of over 5 million viewers. We're honored that you've chosen to be with us for this global LS360 event. Singapore is a wonderful location for this year's LS360, as it is in many ways the economic capital of Southeast Asia. In fact, many multinational corporations base their Asian headquarters here, and for good reason. It is incredible to remember that when Singapore gained its independence less than 60 years ago, it was little more than a small port city that didn't even have enough water for its own residents. Today, it is a world leader in many areas and boasts one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. The entire world has seen that transformation, and it all started with leadership. Singapore is a case study in the power of transformational leadership, which is the theme of this year's Global Leadership Summit. The first Prime Minister of Singapore, the late Lee Kuan Yew, was in many ways comparable to America's George Washington. His leadership over the first 40 years of Singapore's existence enabled our country and its people to achieve the tremendous success that you see all around you today. He was absolutely a transformational leader. That's another reason Singapore is such a great venue for this year's summit. The theme of this year's LS360 is transformational leadership in challenging times. And we certainly live in challenging times. Our hosts for this year's summit, Family First Global and Family First Singapore, are both very proud to be hosting this global event here in Singapore, along with many great corporate sponsors for this year's LS360. I'd like to salute both of our host organizations for this year's LS360, Family First Global and Family First Singapore. Both are non-profit Christian service organizations dedicated to helping all families grow in love and unity and joy. You can find out more about each organization at their respective websites, www.familyfirstglobal.org and www.familyfirstsingapore.org. Family First Global also has great original daily content for moms and dads and families of all ages on Facebook and Instagram. Family First Global has chapters all over the world, including here in Asia. For example, Family First Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, Japan, Myanmar, China, India, and Europe are all proud members of the Family First Global Partnership. Please check out Family First Global and let them know if they might be of service to your family and families in your country. Some of our viewers might ask why non-profit Christian service organizations dedicated to helping families worldwide are co-hosting this year's LS360, and that is an excellent question. The founder and chairman of Family First Global, the Honorable Gregory W. Slayton, is a distinguished professor of leadership at some of the finest universities in the world. His book on fatherhood leadership, Be a Better Dad Today, has sold over 1 million copies in 20 over nations. His research makes it clear that leadership is just as important for a family as it is for a corporation or a sports team or a nation. One of his famous quotes is, "Leadership is destiny." And he is talking about leadership in the family as much as at a Fortune 500 company. We'll be hearing from him shortly. This global LS360 is supported by great corporate sponsors including OUE, Sea Oil, Slayton Capital, Commonwealth Capital, TDR1 Team, TC Acoustic, First Rate, Eu Yan Sang, FIO, and AAG. We especially want to thank our global sponsors. OUE Limited is one of Southeast Asia's largest land developers and has provided safe, affordable housing and workplaces for millions of families. Sea Oil Philippines is one of the largest retail providers of energy in the Philippines. A family-owned business for over 60 years, Sea Oil is dedicated to helping power the Philippines and its wonderful people. Speaking of Fortune 500 companies, it's going to be great to hear today from Mr. Pat Gelsinger, the global CEO of Intel Corporation. Pat is one of the keynote speakers at this year's summit, and he is a wonderful and compelling speaker. Pat is the son of a farmer in rural Pennsylvania whose first degree was from a local community college. Pat started from very humble beginnings, but has become one of the most powerful and respected CEOs in the world. He is also a devoted husband and father, and a highly respected leader in Silicon Valley. He has many leadership lessons for us, and we will hear from him shortly.
Something I so love about Pat is that he is a wonderful, faithful husband and a great father. And he prioritizes that, even though he's the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. And he is a wonderful, wonderful friend. So, Pat, it's fantastic to have you with us here in Singapore. It's really a delight, my brother. And we turn the floor over to you. After this, we're going to have some Q&A. But please take out your pens and pencils, because and I'm going to do that too, we're all going to learn a tremendous amount from Pat Gelsinger. Pat, over to you, brother.
I had, started at Intel at 18 years old. I joke, I started there so young. I went through puberty, worked there for 30 years. And early in my career, I had, written about the idea of a mission statement. And in that mission statement, I said, I want to be CEO of Intel, and wanted to come to that leadership position. And that sort of drove me and led me. And early in my career, wow, I've never even dreamed that possibly could be the case. But as my career progressed, it sort of drove me and made me better along the way. And then 12 years ago, I was pushed out of the company. I was devastated, right? I just, my dream, my vision for 30 years, and now I was out of the company. And, as said to Joseph, what was meant for evil worked out for good. And over that 12-year period, when I was out of the company, it was like I learned so much. I grew as a leader. My own arrogance and, the other things that were inside of me that God just needed to chisel away in that period of time. And I became a much better leader in that process. And Thanksgiving, almost 2 years ago now, I got a call. And from one of the board members of Intel saying, would you consider joining the board? Well, Linda and we started to pray about it, after being out of the company for 11 years, the idea of coming back. And, it was always my vision about being the CEO of Intel. But, life was good. We're just about to have our 8th grandchild. And, VMware was about to take it public, and that was going super well. So, we contemplated, prayed about it. And then just before Christmas, I said, we don't want you to join the board. We want you to be the CEO. Ruined my Christmas. And Linda and I went into prayer and long walks together. And on January 12th, a year and a half ago, we made the decision to come back as the CEO. And it was a decision of Linda and I, and one that, taking on these kind of leadership roles. And one piece of advice to each one of you is that as you move in these roles, it isn't one of you. If God is calling you, both of you are being called into this position. And for Linda and I, this was a dramatic change, taking on this huge challenge, as I would call it, a noble calling, a job that was clearly bigger than me. And that's exactly where God wants you to be. He wants you to take on assignments that are bigger than you. And if you go to the next slide, as I took on the job, it was really these 3 reasons. One is to restore Intel. Intel, one of the most iconic technology companies. 30 years I had spent there. And these 3 people, Gordon Moore, Moore's Law, Andy Grove that Gregory was just referring to, and Robert Noyce, the inventor of the integrated circuit. We call them the Trinity, the leaders that created Silicon Valley, the people that put silicon into Silicon Valley. And in honor of them, the idea of coming back, and restoring this iconic company, and one of the greatest honors I've had in the year and a half since I've been back as CEO, we renamed one of our campuses in honor of Gordon Moore. And, that speech was just one of the most moving things I ever did, the man that started Intel. And I could now honor him by naming one of our sites after him. So it was to restore this iconic company. But, Intel also plays a foundational role in the technology industry and rebuilding this idea of the open platforms that and the ecosystems that Intel has been able to create over time. And many of the standards that you all have come to know and appreciate. I participated in creating PCIe and USB and Wi-Fi. In fact, one of my granddaughters, Alice, when she plugs the USB stick into the computer, she says, "Thank you, Papa." Right? And just how moving that is, because that's what we do at Intel. We create these standards that shape industries and touch every person on the planet. Intel plays an essential role for technology. The third reason was the rebalancing of the global supply chains. And we've become, acutely aware of this as we've gone through COVID, the critical role that semiconductors play in every aspect of human existence, whether it's our medical systems or autonomous cars and vehicles, and everything depends on semiconductors. And I'd ask you, what aspect of your life isn't becoming more digital? Everything is. And everything digital runs on semiconductors. But unfortunately, we've allowed the supply chains to become acutely dependent on very few spots, and they're very fragile. So the third purpose is rebuilding resilient, balanced global supply chains. And just 3 weeks ago, the CHIPS Act was passed in the U.S. And this is something that I worked very, very hard on getting done. The most important piece of industrial policy legislation in the U.S. since World War II. A dramatic piece of legislation. And when I was at the chip signing ceremony 2 weeks ago, be together with the president next week with the groundbreaking at our Ohio site, reshaping industries. And we think about this, our positions, the leadership roles we place. We have to have a noble vision for what we are doing, because God will place us in roles and places that are much bigger than us. And that's just where he needs us, in places that we need to rely on him. Next slide. And since I've taken on this job, this has been my prayer. And it started out these 4 names, and I'll describe the 5th one in a second. But every day as I have my own devotion time, I'm reading one of these stories. The first is that I would have the wisdom of Solomon. And when you take on jobs that are too big for us, you need to have wisdom. You need to have insights. You need to have discernment. And just like when Solomon took on this role from his father David, he said, I need discernment. I can't lead these people, Lord. I need a spiritual leadership breathed into me from you. So I would ask you that you too would pray each day that you would have the wisdom of Solomon. And second, you will have bad days as a leader. You need to have this passion that drives you. And, as I've taken on the job as CEO, our stock was trading about $50 a share when I, took over. It got excited, new CEO, and now it's decayed and the tech industry has decayed, and now we're in the low 30s. I have the analysts that, they're like my Tobiah and Sanballat if you read the story of Nehemiah. I call them my perma-bears, right? He has the right strategy, but not a prayer of executing it. You'll have your bad days, right? And you need to have a deep passion to rebuild. Like Nehemiah, I have my critics, and you too will have your critics. But you need to attack the assignment with the boldness of Joshua. And if you read the first chapter of Joshua, you see that 4 times he's commanded, be strong and courageous. It's not like God said, it's not like Joshua started out, bold and courageous. He needed God to encourage him 4 times in that first chapter for him to take this on. We need to attack the assignment that we're given with boldness, with courage, with confidence, because in ourselves, we may wobble, our knees may shake, we may be indecisive. We need to have that godly boldness and courage. And as leaders, we need to have the integrity of Daniel. And, we remember stories like the lion's den, right? Where Daniel showed an incredible integrity. He became the second in command under 3 different pagan leaders. What an incredible, business leader he was. But he was also honoring God in all of the little things. And we as leaders need to have integrity in everything, just like Daniel did, even in what he ate. Right? He just had integrity in every aspect of his life. And they said they can't find anything to hold against him, except if it has to do with the relationship with his God. So we need the wisdom of Solomon, the passion of Nehemiah, the boldness of Joshua, and the integrity of Daniel. And one day I was talking to my friend Francis Chan, the well-known author, and he says, well, that's a great prayer, Pat. He says, but God is also worried about not just what you do, but also who you become. And he challenged me to also say, I need a 5th one, the heart of David, where it's the character, the noble character that God is building in us as we're on our journey. It's not what we do, it's also who we become as we're in these roles of leadership, that we need to be still. We need to listen. We can't be too hurried. We need to let him be in that leadership role. So I would ask you that you consider the same prayer and join me as a leader that's saying that I would have the wisdom of Solomon, the passion of Nehemiah, the heart of David, the boldness of Joshua, and the integrity of Daniel each day that we go on our leadership journey, that we need that noble prayer. But if we go to the next slide, we also need to have a noble purpose on our journey. And I'm always thrilled by the impact of technology, that we truly have this ability. And today, 60% of humanity has a connection to the internet, using technologies that I've helped create. And my, vision has always been that, that I would work on technology that would improve the lives of every human on the planet. But Intel's purpose is that they would create world-changing technologies that would improve the life of every person on the planet. It's a noble purpose that we are on, that through technology, I get to touch and improve the lives of everyone. And as a company, we also are a company that has a moral compass. Technology itself is neutral. It can be used for good or bad. Right? And as a company and as an individual, I want to be constantly shaping technology as a force for good that truly, has impacts in the world. AI, will it be used for good or bad? We want to be the company that's constantly shaping it for good and noble purposes. But as leaders, we also have big platforms. And as a big platform, we get to do things. We get to create. We get to drive things. And a few of those are the philanthropies that Linda and I have been extraordinarily successful with over our times in leadership. And many times these start small. Like the one in the upper right is a picture of our schools in Africa, Mission of Hope International. And when we started, it was a few dollars and the schools were a couple hundred kids. We stayed faithfully involved. Today, 25,000 kids are being lifted out of poverty because of our faithfulness now over 2.5 decades. And you too can have that kind of impact. We've also, in coming back to the Bay Area, we helped to start what's called Transforming the Bay with Christ, bringing together the churches, the leaders, the parachurch leaders in the Bay Area, because I have a big platform. We get to convene, we get to bring people together, and we get to do not just business purposes, but also use that platform for godly purposes as well. And as a company, we have bold visions for what we can do with Intel as our technologies touch every person on the planet over time. We truly have a noble purpose as leaders. And if we go to the next page, we need some noble advisors on the way. And I've been blessed to have, these 5 individuals who've breathed into my life. And I think of us as leaders that we're diamonds in the rough, right? We need to have these influences that come and knock off those rough edges and expose our facets. Early in my time at Intel, I was giving a presentation to the executive staff, and I was a lowly engineer presenting to the senior leadership, and Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore and Andy Grove were there. And I gave an update, and I was pretty pointed and direct. And as a young guy, I was maybe even a little bit precocious in my strong statements. Well, about a week later, my phone rings in my office, and I didn't want to be interrupted. I picked up the phone. Who is it? Andy. Andy who? And your voice comes back, Andy Grove. And he starts shelling me with questions. What do you read? What are you studying? What's your next job? What's your career objectives? I was panicked. I could barely answer him. Those are lousy answers. Be in my office in a week with better ones. The president says to show up in his office. What do you do? Right? You either leave the country or you show up. And that began a mentoring relationship that lasted literally till Andy passed away in 2016, now almost 6 years ago. And mentoring with Andy was like going to the dentist but not getting Novocaine. He was tough, he was hard, but he made you better. And every one of us needs people like that in our life. And these are 5 pictures of the 5 greatest influences of my life. And every great leader that I've ever interacted with, they can point to those who've invested in them. And I would just encourage every one of you to have those influences in your life. And, when I was taking on this job, my father passed away last year. One of my other mentors, Bryce Jessup, passed away 2 years ago. Luis Palau, another who I've invested in, passed away. And Steve Menifee, who I've mentored with, a retired tech CEO, he was having heart surgery. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing, God? Right? All of these influences in my life are passing on. All of a sudden, I'm the old guy, right? I need these kind of influences, and people like Gregory, have been important prayer influences in my life, because you need those people on the journey. Leadership roles are lonely positions. We need to have those who are breathing into our life as well. We need noble advisors on the journey of life. But then, as a leader, if you go to the next slide, we need to gather around us a noble team. And these are 3 groups of people who are part of my leadership at Intel. The first group is my board of directors. And Intel and its board of directors, have had challenges. And part of the reason Intel got into a tough situation is the relationship with board and management wasn't a good one. And I committed as I came back into this job that we were going to have the best relationship between board and management. A CEO should never surprise their board. A board should never surprise their CEO. And if I take you back to December a year and a half ago, as they were interviewing me for the board for the CEO position, and I'm meeting with each of the board members, I insisted that if they were going to call me as the CEO, we needed to have 2 things. We needed to agree on the strategy, and I'd written a strategy document, and it must be unanimous on the strategy, and it has to be unanimous in calling me as the CEO. And when they offered me the job on January 11th, it was like every one of them on Zoom went one by one, affirming their support for the strategy and affirming their support for me as CEO. These are tough assignments. You need to have your board, those that you're accountable to, fully on board, never surprising. And, as you look at this, it's a diverse group of different skills. You want to have people that don't agree with you, that challenge you, that make you better, but you need to be on the same vision together. You need to have a board that is part of your team and cheering you on every day, because these jobs are hard. The second group on this picture is my leadership team. And these are the 16 that form the senior executive team around me. And this team, right, most of them, 11 of the 16, are new to their company or new to their roles since I've taken over. We had to reform the leadership team. And now this is my team, and we come together and we're going to align, we're going to challenge each other, we're going to debate, we're going to have conversations, we're going to share data, we're going to make each other better, but we're going to go on a tremendous transformational journey together because we're out to write the next great turnaround story in the industry, the next business book of great success and transformation. We have to rebuild the culture of the company. We have to overcome the stumbles that we've made. We have to root out the areas that the company hasn't operated with, the highest of standards and, the deepest of cultural alignment. We as a team need to come together on this journey. But the last group is maybe the most important. One of the things that happened to Intel is the transitions across leadership were not smooth over time. In fact, one of the last times that I was meeting with Andy Grove, we were having dinner together at his favorite Japanese restaurant, and he was lamenting to me how he made poor succession choices and how succession didn't go well in his. And, again, this is, a man I've idolized my whole career. And hearing him ask me, what did I do wrong, Pat? How did I make these mistakes? I'm like, no, Andy, you're the one who tells me wisdom, not me to you. But he hadn't succeeded at succession. And this created some of the sequence of difficulties for Intel. And 5 or 10 years from now, one of the things that I need to do is make sure that the next generation of leaders is in place and being successful. And I've built up my succession team. So as the middle group of leaders moves forward, that we have the next group of leaders coming along, that baton passing to the next generation is successful. And I need to be the mentor to them. I need to be their Andy Grove, building them up, knocking off the rough edges, preparing them for the next leadership. And if I do that and the company does even better after I'm gone, then I've been successful as a leader. Then I've created truly a noble team of those I'm accountable to, those I work with, and those that I pass the baton with. And I've always liked this passage from Ecclesiastes. A cord of 3 threads is not easily broken. And this idea, I think of, those that you're accountable to, those you work with, and those that you're passing on to. I think of that as the 3 strands of a leader. And that's part of what means a noble team. And, as a leader, you have to make all of those work. That's part of your job, to be working together, held, right? That you're accountable, but also preparing for the future as well. So every one of us needs to be part of a noble team. So as we summarize our time, I'm a year and a half into this journey as the CEO of Intel. I believe one of the most important companies that has ever existed in technology. Now I have the opportunity to be its leader in this period of transformation and turning it around. And I'm on a noble journey that truly is bigger than me, but I feel like God has unquestionably put me here. He's prepared me for this. He's given me the skills. Every experience of my career is coming to fruition in this time of leadership that I'm now in at Intel. And as I see all the threads of my career come together, the people, the influence, the experiences, the failures, and the successes, right? It is a noble calling that I'm on.
Well, thank you, Pat. Let's give a round of applause to Pat Gelsinger.
An amazing speech by Pat. Lots of transformational leadership lessons for all of us. Next, we're going to hear from Singapore's Minister of State, Ms. Sun Xueling. She is a rising star in the government of Singapore and an important voice in Singapore on a wide range of issues. She'll be speaking to us about transformational leadership from a national perspective. but also how a nation's success really starts with transformational leadership in the homes of its families. It's going to be a fascinating talk, and that's coming up very soon. Now, to open the summit, let's listen to the opening prayer offered by Reverend Dr. Chan Chong Hoi of East Asia School of Theology Church here in Singapore. As you know, a strong family, true friends, and an active faith all reinforce one another. So let's join Reverend Dr. Chan Chong Hoi for his opening prayer.
Let us now bow in prayer as we commit our time to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you so much for bringing us together to the vision and the hard work of Family First Global, Family First Singapore, and also the sponsors, Sea Oil and OUE. We praise you, Lord, that you have given us this time that we see as a divine appointment. And we ask of you that you minister to us as leaders of the places we come from, the countries we come from, that you may anoint us like you did for the sons of Issachar, who knew the times and discerned the times and act courageously. We thank you, Lord, that you will give us wisdom during this time today. Help us to remember that we may act upon them. And now, Lord, as we go into a time of food, we commit our time over the table. There'll be encouraging, strengthening, mutually a blessing to all of us. And so we commit the session ahead to you in Jesus' most holy and precious name. Amen.
That was a beautiful opening prayer. Next, we turn to the Minister of State for the Government of Singapore, Sun Xueling, who will be sharing with us about the power of transformational leadership to move families, organizations, and even entire nations forward.
There is a saying that a leader is only as good as their team, and the often cited African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I think we all recognize that leadership is not about me, but about the we, and that people-first mindset is critical and crucial. Stephen Covey wrote that people should be seen for their potential, motivations, talents, and human nature. They should be seen as whole people, as opposed to being viewed as things to be controlled or as a means to an end. And I must say that employees feel it and they know it. They know it when their bosses or their employers respect them and see them as whole people. Stephen Covey also advocates a trust and inspire approach which brings people together as opposed to the traditional command and control style. And this trust and inspire leadership style empowers people, encourages mutual trust, collaboration, and support to blossom within the workplace, which will bode well for productivity, business results, and very importantly, happy people, happy workers. I'd like to talk about Mr. Bob Buford. I don't know how many of you may have read his book, Halftime. It was transformational for me, transformational. He asked, if there was only one thing you could take from a box and that would define your life, what would that be? I've often found myself asking myself that question. And Bob Buford, his blessed soul, he had written about a simple reflection exercise that can help us think about what our life mission is. First, set aside time to make lists of things that you are committed to. This can be a list of slogans and statements that you resonate with, along with a list of things that you would like to do. Once you are done, read, reflect, share your list with your close ones, listen to what they have to say, then put the list away. Take a week to think about what you love to do most, and in the following week, start a new list with the words, My Life Mission, at the top. I find myself doing that very often. I'm not too sure I was supposed to do it every day, but somehow I think I forget my life mission after, because it can change and all sorts of things come along, you know. We're all so busy, and sometimes we see that the unfortunate thing is that we sometimes deal with the things that are urgent. But when we deal daily with things that are urgent, we forget what our life mission is. So I have often found myself doing this exercise, waking up early in the morning, getting a piece of pen and paper and writing down what are the really significant things to do. My life mission. Bob Buford, when he wrote this, had wanted to help readers who were at the half-time of their lives. But what he wrote need not only be applied at the half-time of our individual lives. For organizations that have come to crossroads, as leaders, perhaps we can also ask ourselves and our organizations the same questions. What are the list of things that we are committed to doing? What would we like to achieve in the next phase? Let us take some time off, talk to stakeholders, and start with a new list with the words, our company mission on top. At the same time, I think we need to recognize new realities, which is that post-COVID-19, many workers around the world are not looking at work the same way they look at it as before. I was talking to some young volunteers and they asked me, have you seen the TikTok videos on quiet quitting? I don't know whether they're trying to tell me something. They are no longer looking at jobs and work the way they used to. They are looking for purpose and meaning in their lives and jobs. And we need to acknowledge this new paradigm. So even as we clarify our personal and company missions and communicate that as a vision and bring our workers and employees along, we will also have to transform workplaces so that they complement what our employees are trying to achieve in their personal lives. Through COVID-19, I think many employees, for all of us here today as well, I think we have come to appreciate the little things in life, little in inverted commas, because these are actually not little at all. Family relationships, health, personal happiness. As we lead our organizations and communities towards a more family-friendly future, let us also not forget to do our part as family members ourselves. At the end of the day, it comes down to individual members like yourselves and I to take the first step to choose to prioritize family time. And this can be as simple as setting aside time to listen to one another, support each other, or committing to family meals so we can be present with our loved ones. I'm heartened that we are seeing progress towards building a culture that celebrates and supports family life, but sustaining this will always be work in progress, and that's why we're very grateful to Family First and your work. And let us continue to work together to build on this momentum beyond the year of celebrating SG families for many, many more years to come. And through today's summit, I hope that we can share and learn from the varied experiences of fellow leaders and leverage on each other's strengths.
That was a great talk from the minister. So many great leadership lessons for us. Now let's turn our attention to the LS 360 co-chair and chairman of Family First Global, the Honorable Professor Gregory Slayton, as he speaks about Family First Global and its noble vision to help families around the world. Professor Slayton was the U.S. Chief of Mission to Bermuda under both President Bush and Obama. He is the only U.S. ambassador ever given the Distinguished Foreign Service Award by both House and Senate Republican leadership and the Congressional Black Caucus. He's a successful venture capitalist who helped both Google and Salesforce.com in their early days. And he is a distinguished professor of leadership at some of the world's finest universities. He is also a globally best-selling author whose book, Be a Better Dad Today, has sold over 1 million copies in over 20 nations. But I know that he is proudest of his family and his 4 wonderful adult children. Professor Slayton founded Family First Global over 10 years ago and has led it to become a global organization with worldwide impact. Let's listen to his talk now.
And thank you one and all for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to be here, see so many dear friends. You know, we really love Singapore. The only thing that's important today is what you learn, what we learn together. And that's the whole reason that we're doing this, that we can learn together how to become better leaders for our companies, for our churches, for our organizations, for our government entities, and yes, for our families. The future of a company or a country or a team or a church or a family depends on leadership. Let's go back to Singapore. Let's go back to Lee Kuan Yew, 1965. A lot of you are too young to remember, but Singapore didn't have any natural resources, didn't even have enough water to supply its own people for more than 3 days. Okay? Lee Kuan Yew came in with the noble vision, noble character, and a lot of guts, a lot of courage. He transformed this island nation from one of the poorer nations in the world to one of the richest nations in the world. Now, there are many different styles of leadership, and each can be effective in different situations, okay? But I strongly believe, having studied this subject for 30 years, that transformational leadership is the most effective long-term leadership style. And you can look at many of the men and women in world history who have transformed their countries or even their nations. And I think of Mahatma Gandhi. Right? I think of the Reverend Martin Luther King. Right? I think of Lee Kuan Yew. I think of George Washington, our first president. Some of you might say, no, I wasn't born in the right circumstances. I didn't go to the right college. I didn't go to college at all or whatever. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. What matters is that God has given you the ability to be a transformation leader in your circumstance. I would state it even more clearly, the responsibility to become a transformational leader for whatever area of responsibility God has given you. What are the 3 things that really are the hallmarks of transformational leadership? So first of all, a beautiful thing about transformational leadership is it brings the group together. I talk about a noble family vision. And let me commit to you that that is super important for every family. Otherwise, the mom's going this way, the dad's going this way, the kids are going this way, right? But a noble family vision brings it together, right? Brings it together, unifies the team. Noble vision, noble character, and courage. Some people call it faith. I personally call it guts. Guts. Nothing is accomplished in life without guts. Let me tell you the secret. Secret is everyone wants to have a boss who is a noble boss, who is a virtuous boss, right? Who treats others with respect and kindness. Everyone wants that. So let's be that kind of boss. Let's be that kind of leader. Let's be that kind of mom and dad, all right? And then third, let's have courage. I'm excited about today. I'm excited about the journey of transformational leadership, and I want to thank each one of you for joining me in that journey. Thank you. God bless you.
That was most certainly a compelling call to action from Professor Slayton for all of us as leaders. Family First Global certainly is doing important work worldwide. And Family First is working right here in Singapore to bless families of all races and backgrounds as well. Let's now tune in to the talk of Mr. Richard Hoon, co-chair of this LS360 event and a member of the board of Family First Singapore. Richard is a successful Singaporean business leader who also did a great job leading the government of Singapore's Centre for Fathering for many years. He's widely respected across Singapore for his business success, but also his commitment to his family and to philanthropic causes that benefit Singapore.
In his book on innovation, titled 0 to 1, co-founder and former CEO of PayPal, Peter Thiel, wrote that true innovative thinking comes by thinking about business from first principles instead of from formulas. So he encouraged us to go back to our foundation. First principle thinking commands center stage in helping leaders to keep to the fundamentals as we navigate the uncertainty in life. It is important in the business world to find deeper significance in our family. Strong leadership stems from the foundation of strong values and belief. The essence of who we are. Where are we from? What are we doing here? Where are we going? First principle can be revisited afresh or even keenly engaged, but it can never be compromised or eradicated. We cannot be principle-centered leaders without first being rooted and engaged on first principle. But we live on this first 5 principle, and that is, husband, love your wife as you had pursued her. Number 1. Number 2, wife, respect your husband as you had responded to him. 3, parents, love your children by teaching, coaching, and mentoring them. Number 4, children, listen to your parents. And number 5, parents, above all, love their fathers and their mothers more than you love them. So my wife had a chance to do that, and I learned that for so many years. And really, I learned it probably more in the last 6 years of our life together. So I had a chance to practice that in my life. I hope yours will not take that long as you build upon what the mistakes that we have made in our life. And may we as parents live authentic personal life in front of our families. If we take care of that area, we shouldn't have much problem leading our team and our organization. Remember to nourish your soul and live life from inside out.
LS360 co-chair Richard Hoon certainly gave us some points to ponder. Now we have a chance to learn from a panel discussion of Southeast Asian leaders led by the former Dean of the National University of Singapore, Bernard Yong. They will be talking about transformational leadership on the work front, how we can better lead our organization to new heights, whether it is business, a nonprofit, a school, or even a church.
We hear that transformational leaders, they cause changes in individuals, in organizations, and in society. They articulate an energizing vision and inspire followers to change their own expectations, their perceptions, and motivate them to work towards common good. But in reality, this concept, transformational leadership, is practical and very powerful, especially in today's very turbulent world. We heard a lot this morning.
If I were to give an example from the West, the one that comes to my mind is Chick-fil-A founder Truett Cathy. And for those of you who don't know Chick-fil-A, they're closed on Sundays. And I think that when we talk about transformational leadership, in my mind, they're game changers because they don't just play the game, they change the way the game is played. And what's interesting to note is that when asked, he said that why are they closed on Sunday? He mentioned that he for himself does not like to work on Sundays, and he cannot imagine other people wanting to go to work on Sundays as well. So understanding that empathy and knowing also to think of not just himself and the bottom line, but also the people that work for him, I think is one of the examples that makes him a transformational leader.
I think from the social services sector, it would be the nameless social worker. They are the transformational leaders because they go out and they help regardless of time. It's almost 24/7. And they are the ones that transform lives. And they lead in transforming the lives of the families that they work with. So it's not somebody famous or someone in Google, but it's really the nameless social worker that worked tirelessly.
When you look at it from East or West practice perspective, it is still about how do you treat people. And I do think that the values that you have drives how you treat people and therefore how you lead a company. And so, whether you're from the East or the West, it pretty much depends on the value that you are holding on to. And I think that's where the difference would be. Everyone is a leader. That's what we tell people in the company. whether you are a formal leader with people reporting to you or you're informal. And I'm sure all of you in the room, in some shape or form, do influence someone else. And by that act, you are a leader. And so therefore, whatever that you do in interacting with others has an impact on people.
So that's one of the things I think that helps in terms of being a transformational organization, is recognizing as well that there are non-financial metrics that are there. So sometimes the temptation and the focus is going to be on the financial metrics, but those are outcomes and less towards driving the purpose of the organization.
I'll add by saying resistance to change is given. That's something that you have to expect, and that's what you will experience. And what is important is, as a leader, you got to be authentic. Are you true to who you are in terms of how you represent yourself?
Yeah, I think we all have to be willing to have those tough conversations with people. And in our case, it's called the gentle and kind truth. So we can tell people the truth, but we don't necessarily have to be rude or disrespectful. And there is always a right manner of communicating.
That was a wonderful panel discussion with some great transformational leadership lessons for organizations. Now let's listen in to our second panel discussion on what transformational leadership can mean for our families and our communities. Melissa Kui, the CEO of Singapore's National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, is our moderator.
You know, many people have said that the pandemic is this time that we kind of ripped open, the lid on so many issues in society. So many structural issues that were there. People who didn't have to bump into each other were now living in very close quarters. Things that you really maybe didn't want to see, you can now not unsee. People's private struggles, became so much more visible in some ways because of our close proximity. And instead of just being so busy doing all these kinds of things, here we are now with all this time. And what do we do?
In the past, we all want work-life balance, and anything that's in the balance is itself intrinsically impossible to fulfill. It's stressful on both sides. And of course, certain quarters have said, let's have work-life harmony, and which is an improvement, but harmony means compromise. You have to give in each way. So in the short term, it's sustainable, but in the long term, it's not. So I like to think that going forward, we should have work-life autonomy. The reason is because we all have to take control of our accountability. Both bosses have to take accountability for their company, but individual, we have to take accountability for our action in the work.
Singapore and the communities that we're in have to learn how to rally to help each other. And that really I define as social cohesiveness. And the social cohesiveness that we want to see as a national objective has to start with the individual family.
You're right. The government can't legislate on any of these things. It's kind of up to us, right? As members of society, as friends to one another, as neighbors, as peer supporters, actually, as leaders of organizations, to be setting the right tone and expectation around that.
I think at the end of the day, when we talk about transformational leadership, it's linked to priorities. What do you devote yourself to pursuing? And for me, the learning is that I need to reset my priorities to focus family first. So we're informed by this truth, but how many of us are transformed by this truth? How do we live by this truth?
As a father, as a husband, what are the greatest challenges, temptations, derailment factors, that are sort of always there? And what do you do to keep on track?
Well, if I can remember, the first 10 years, I was a teacher to them, because when I teach, they will listen. And when they were in their teens, I became a coach, because now I got to observe their strengths, their weaknesses, and fine-tune for them. Because I can't teach them as much now. They won't listen, but I can be the cheerleader for them. But to be a cheerleader and a coach, I must be a good teacher in the past, because they will listen to me. And then now they're in their 20s, I become a mentor. Mentoring for me as a father in your kids in their 20s and 30s means unless you're asked, you keep your mouth shut.
And as I look back on my own childhood, it was the simple holidays to Fraser's Hill and so on and so forth that you remember, although we're very well traveled. But it was, those times. So I encourage, fathers to take time to have fun and make memories. When your child comes to you with a problem, you must intervene. Because if you don't intervene, that child is going to come to you again with another problem, and if you don't intervene, that child is going to ask for advice elsewhere.
Maybe some of you can relate to me. I have an absent dad, pretty much, right? And I really don't have a role model, actually. And it's really tough. So sometimes, wisdoms like this, I really benefit a lot. That's one. Second of all, get into the company of good men and women, right? Because don't journey along, because no one has all the answers. There'll be times where you feel down. You need someone to pull you up. So don't journey along. So that's my second thing.
I think you can make a difference one life at a time. Operate with dignity, to give people dignity. Operate with empathy and compassion. Very often the needs in our community that are the biggest needs are the ones that are not visible.
We know leadership in company, businesses, organizations is important. It's very important in family, very important in family. The dads and moms have the responsibility to lead the family. We cannot leave it to chances. We have to lead. Intentional leadership in the family is very important. If you want the outcome, you want to steer the family towards a certain direction, you have to start leading responsibly and intentionally.
Another great panel discussion on transformational leadership, this time on the home front and the community front. Please remember that if you want to see Pat's full speech or that of any of our speakers today, you can see them in full at www.familyfirstglobal.org.